Brianza is coming too. Really? Oh yeah, he said he was gonna try to come. Austin was I didn't talk to Austin about it this week. Last week when he said he couldn't, we had to just talk this morning. Oh yeah, I'm excited. We should probably correct this, right? He was. Now he doesn't.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum everyone. On behalf of Hunter MSA, I'd like to welcome you all to Happily Ever After Part 2. Before we begin, we're going to have a recitation. Brother Delawar.
نعم الماهدون ومن كل شيء خلقنا زوجين لعلكم تذكرون ففروا إلى الله إني لكم منه نذير مبين ولا تجعلوا مع الله إلها آخر إني لكم منه نذير مبين كذلك ما أتى الذين من قبلهم من رسول إلا قالوا ساحر أو مجنون أتواصوا به بل هم قوم طاغون فتول عنهم فما أنت بملوم وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون ما أريد منهم من رزق وما أريد أن يطعمون إن الله هو الرزاق ذو القوة المتين فإن للذين ظلموا ذنوبا مثل ذنوب أصحابهم فلا يستعجلون فويل للذين كفروا من يومهم الذي يوعدون.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Delwar, for that recitation. Now we have a few announcements.
Assalamu alaikum. As Ruba mentioned, Jazakallah khairan to everyone once again for attending. Just a couple announcements from Hunter MSA as well as a couple of outside organizations, inshallah. First, most of you guys already know, but for those of you that don't, we have our weekly brothers and sisters Hanaqa separately on Wednesdays from 1 to 3 p.m. Just a place to come, have a frank discussion about different topics, just to build that Islamic community on campus for us. So everything you guys go through there, just pull up. It's a good environment for you to get to know your fellow Muslims on campus. Secondly, we do have weekly halaqas outside of that, so a bigger gathering. Our speaker for this semester is Abdul Minam Mustafa, and basically any Friday that we don't have an event. So like this Friday we have this event. Any Friday we don't have an event, we have this weekly halaqah going on. And so next Friday, inshallah, we'll have this halaqah. It's called Foundations of Faith. It's as the title says itself. Our speaker, our halaqah teacher, is going through with us just some of the fundamentals that we can use in our daily lives as Americans, as students, going to college and trying to live our faith as best as possible. One other event that's happening, not related to Hunter MSA, but ICNA Relief is doing a fundraising dinner not this Saturday, but the coming Saturday. It's going to be in Long Island Marriott at 7 p.m. Dr. Yasser Qadi is showing up. For those of you that don't know, ICNA Relief is a charity organization that focuses its efforts in the U.S. itself. And so we have a lot of charity organizations that work abroad, which is great, but not as many that are focused on the Muslim community, the needy Muslim community that is based in the States itself. And so this specifically, this fundraising dinner, is for raising money for family shelters in New York. For those of you that don't know, especially in New York, Ibn Relief, alhamdulillah, does amazing work in terms of providing many homeless Muslim women with a place to stay, especially, and a lot of these women are converts who have been kicked out of their homes because they have chosen to align with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it's our duty as Muslims to give them a home and to provide them that shelter. And so this effort itself specifically is going towards that. If anyone wants more information, you can ask one of us afterwards. Another kind of event that's happening outside, it's an inter-MSA event that's being primarily hosted by NYU Tandon MSA as well as New York MSA Showdown. It's the MSAs assemble a summit of sorts. As you can see up there, the speakers they'll have is Imam Khalid Latif, Imam Suhaib Webb, Muhammad al-Matheed, Maryam Khwaja. And so the whole point of this is to build a network, a community between different MSAs across New York. That unity that it provides is essential, is very necessary. There is like a $5 fee. I think we'll be sharing this on our Facebook page too. You can look at it over there. It'll be great to have Hunter MSA's participation in this. And as far as events go, lastly, our own event, inshallah, our next event is going to be 2 weeks from today, so March 23rd. It's being co-hosted by Qalam Institute, for those of you guys that have heard of it. And our speaker, Imam Mikael Smith, will be talking about the emulation of Rasulullah ﷺ's actions and his shama'il, his attributes, into our own lives. It'll be the culmination of our Islamic Awareness Week. For those of you guys that don't know, it's going to be that week. So not this coming week, but the following week is going to be Islamic Awareness Week. So inshallah, the whole week we'll have events planned. Monday we'll have a bake sale, all proceeds going to charity. Tuesday we'll have a mini event in the evening. Wednesday we'll have a da'wah table and a table set up to, again, fundraise towards charity. Thursday, inshallah, we'll be having a converts panel. And then Friday, the culmination would be this event. Look out for more detail, inshallah. Everything will be going out through our email. Make sure you're on our email listserv. It'll also be up on the Facebook page, inshallah. So that's about it for events. One more thing. So our shirt, our MSA t-shirt it should be already open. So we have a page up here. It's not that hard, but you can find the link itself on our Facebook page. We've sent out emails. We'll send out more emails. Inshallah, 5% goes to charity. And for a limited time only, inshallah, it'll end at the end of this weekend. So Sunday night will be the last time you can use the promo code, 10% off. The promo code is Hunter is Best. No spaces, no capitals, nothing. Just simply Hunter is Best. You get 10% off your whole order. If you click buy now right there, you have the option of getting a hoodie, long sleeve shirt, short sleeve shirt, and if you go in, let's say the long sleeve shirt, you open the page for the long sleeve shirt. You have like options for color as well, so it's great. It's supporting charity and it's supporting MSA. So just check it out. The promo code ends this weekend, inshallah. And so limited time, chance only. And that's it for me. So I'll hand it right back, inshallah.
So before we begin, I'd like to remind you all that there's a number up there. If you have any questions, text it, and during the Q&A, we're going to try our best to get your question answered. So Suzy Ismail is the founder and head communication counselor at Cornerstone, a faith-based communication counseling center. She previously taught for over 15 years in the communication departments at Rutgers University and DeVry University. Suzy is the author of several books and specializes in presenting a range of communication lectures and diversity workshops, and provides seminars nationally and internationally, and is a student advisor. She works with refugee families and orphans through recovery and integration counseling. She currently serves as an executive officer and director on several nonprofit boards, commissions, and organizations. She is completing her doctorate in marriage and family intervention and resides in Princeton, New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Suzy Ismail.
Alright, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. So alhamdulillah, it's very nice to finally be here at Hunter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly is the best of all planners. We had planned for me to come in last week, and due to our crazy New Jersey weather, I think we had weather that was even worse than you guys had in New York. It was delayed. But alhamdulillah, you wound up getting a 2-part program on Happily Ever After rather than just one day. So inshallah, together we will enter on this journey of what does it mean to reach a happily ever after. I believe last week you were able to hear from the sister who spoke to you, the chaplain, I believe, from one of the New York colleges, who spoke to you about what it means to understand love from the perspective of loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and loving oneself. And today we're going to take the next level. What does it mean to love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Now, whenever the topic happily ever after is given to me from a university, from a college, my mind, of course, immediately goes to the topic of marriage. Not that that's what you guys were thinking of, right? But that's essentially the topic that I will usually turn towards, because when we think of that ideal happily ever after, we often view it as the ending to a relationship that is solidified for that long-term goal of achieving that happiness or connecting with someone in order to attain that happiness. Now, I thought it was really cute when I went onto the Facebook page of the Hunter MSA to double check the time and the building and the address and everything. And I saw there was a little video that the MSA, I guess, had recorded where several of you were giving a one-word response as to what was your view about what makes a relationship important, I believe, or what makes a good relationship. And there was a range of answers as I watched the video. There was those of you who said commitment, those of you who said loyalty, those of you who said love, those of you who said enthusiasm, which I'm still trying to understand, but whatever floats your boat. So there were these different ideas of what makes a relationship really something that's defined as a good relationship. So let's start at the very beginning. I thought it was beautiful that we began the recitation that opened this program with Surah 51, rather than beginning with the surah that is most often the one that MSAs, colleges, events that are having happily ever after programs usually begin with. And the surah that we usually begin with is Surah Al-Rum, and in particular, verse 21. Which is known most often as the marriage verse. Because in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us what the purpose of the marriage relationship is. And in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to us what a good relationship between man and woman in marriage really consists of. And we see in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that the marriage relationship is created لِتَسْكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا. And when we look at the translation of what that means, we'll often see that it is translated as to dwell in tranquility. That the marriage relationship is a place where a couple can dwell in tranquility. But when we look at the specific etymology of the word itself, لِتَسْكَنُوا, we see that the root word of لِتَسْكَنُوا is sukun. And we see that the root of sukun, it's made of the 3 letters, sakan. And when we look at the Arabic language, we understand that sakan is the Arabic term for home. And we see that the word sukoon, which is again utilizing those same root letters, sukoon, when we're reading the Quran and we arrive to alamat al-sukoon in our tajweed, we reach the place of sukoon, what do? We stop. It's a place to pause. And the intention of pausing at alamat al-sukoon is to catch your breath. And when we look at the verse in the Quran and we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes for us the marriage relationship as لَا تَسْكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that may you dwell in tranquility, we begin to understand how to achieve that tranquility. Because our marriages, our solid, good relationships are meant to be a place where we catch our breath, a place where we find rest, a place that when the entire world is rocking us back and forth and we're facing troubles and difficulties, we come back to our homes, we come back to our spouse, and we catch our breath and we find that rest. And how do we achieve that place of tranquility? We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in that ayah by reminding us that it is a place of tranquility that we will dwell in by achieving within that relationship mawadda wa rahma, care and mercy. And when we look at that word mawadda, again, it's translated, you'll sometimes see it translated as care, sometimes you'll see it translated as love. We begin to understand what mawadda is by, again, studying the Arabic language and understanding the etymology of the word. When we look at the word mawadda, we see that the root of it is wid. And when we look at the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we see that the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserves to describe His love for humanity, or His place as the one who loves His creation, as Al-Wadud, the one who loves. And yet when we look at the Arabic language, we see that there are several different words for love. Yet the word that is used to describe the love in the marriage relationship is mawadda, which is connected to that root word of al-wadud, the word of love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala names Himself, reserves for His own name to describe the love that Allah has for creation. So I remember a few years back, I was speaking to a professor at the university who is a linguist. And he was telling me, I love the Arabic language because there's so many words in Arabic that actually you can find the root of our English words in those Arabic words, because it's a language that's very poetic and different than any other. So I told him, give me an example, what words do you mean? And so he told me, where do you think the word wedding came from? I'm like, I don't know, wedding, where'd it come from? And he said, if you look at the root word of wedding, the verb of wedding is to wed, right? You wed someone. And he said, the word wed actually comes from the Arabic word wid, because there's no other language that uses a word for love that is described in the marriage relationship as the same word for love that is described to show a love that goes beyond earthly boundaries, a love that extends into that which is spiritual. And we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserves that description for love in the marital relationship, mawadda wa rahma. But it's not mawadda alone, it's not love alone that brings us to that place of tranquility in our relationship. It's love and mercy. And again, when we look at rahmah, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that before we begin anything, we begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We begin with a reminder that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most compassionate, the most merciful. And yet in the marriage verse, we also see that almost divine characteristic of rahmah being applied to what makes our marriages successful. And that's how we achieve our happily ever after, by linking our view of what makes a relationship a good relationship to that understanding that we are given in the Quran of the definition of that marital relationship. Now what's really beautiful is that when we look at that verse 21, again, we'll often view the verse almost in isolation. when you're getting a wedding invite, and I know a lot of people don't send the old-fashioned, 2-ton heavy cards anymore. Like, people invite you to your wedding getting like an evite now. You get like a little rabbit that pops out of a box and says, "Hey, we're getting married." So when you get the evite, or if you still are traditional and you get that heavy cardstock invitation, a lot of times you'll see that verse from Surah Al-Rum at the top of the card, or at the start of the wedding, you'll hear that verse recited. But when we look at that verse again in context, we see that the verse that precedes it, ayah 20, and the verse that comes after it, ayah 22, speaks to us of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us from dust, as a diversity, from different lands. And it continues in that verse that follows the marriage verse. Why were we created from different lands? So that we may know each other, even though we are speaking in different languages. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term lisan to describe different tongues. So what does that mean for us in the marital relationship? It means that when we do find that person, the one that we feel is going to help us in that journey towards a happily ever after, we may not be of the same background. We may not be of the same race. We may not be of the same ethnic nationality or cultural background, and we may speak different tongues. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us so that we may know one another, and so that we may dwell in tranquility with one another. So let's go back to that concept of the happily ever after. Oftentimes when we have lectures or talks under this banner, under this title, there's often a singular color that stands out in the flyer. And I noticed that in this flyer, you actually did not have that color, but you substitute it with like the sunset over I don't know if that's the Hudson or something a little bit nicer. So what color do you think I'm referencing in terms of what we often see on the flyers and in advertisements or anything related to the concept of love? Red. So the color red is one that we've often, almost subconsciously begun to relate to the idea of love, and particularly marital love. But when we look at the color red and we understand psychologically what it means to us, we think of, for example, when you see the bullfights in Spain, when the matador is trying to incite the bull, what color does the matador hold in front of the eyes of the bull? The color red. So the intention, I hope, is not to have the bull fall in love with the matador, right? That's not what the matador is going for, right? Yet, what's even more interesting is it turns out that the bulls are actually colorblind. So it's not the color that incites the animal, but it's the movement of the cloth that incites the animal. But the color is intended to incite the audience. It's intended to incite the audience to a fevered pitch of passion, to a fevered pitch of anger, of fear, of rage, not of love. Because the emotions that are affiliated with the color red are not long-term emotions. The emotions affiliated with the color red are often linked to passion. They're linked to something fleeting. Yet when we begin to subconsciously ingest the idea that the color red should be what defines our marriages or our relationships, our long-term relationships, then we step away from the understanding that the Quran gives us, that a relationship, a strong marital relationship, is one that is built on dwelling in tranquility, is one that is built upon mawadda wa rahmah, is one that is built on a love that is a love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, when we affiliate the color red with the concept of love, we tend to want those intense bouts of passion consistently. We tend to want that increased, almost emotion that's so elevated on a regular basis. And when our marriages don't deliver that feeling, then we feel like we've lost something. We feel like we're missing something. When we go about seeking our happily ever after, and we think to ourselves that, you know what, I'm not waking up for Fajr right now, but that's okay. When I marry someone, I want to marry someone who will wake me up for Fajr. I'm not happy right now. I feel sad sometimes. I feel like something's missing. But when I get married, I'm going to find that missing piece. I'm going to find that sense of happiness. But the reality is, that's part of the myth that has been fed to us by Hollywood, by Bollywood, by society, by Hallmark. But it's not the reality of what our marriages should look like. There's something that we term in our counseling center, something that's known as the Jerry Maguire syndrome. Now, I know this movie is a bit old, but some of you may be familiar with it. How many of you have seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Yay, okay, I see a hand there. Okay, all right, so a few of you have. Like a few years ago when I referenced this movie, everybody like, oh, I know the movie. Now, I don't know, what can I reference now? I'm not even sure what the popular movies are anymore. Black Panther, maybe? I don't know if we can tie that in, but it'll make me seem relevant, so maybe I should mention that. But in that movie, Jerry Maguire, there's a very famous line. Since you raised your hand, I'm going to call on you. What was the famous line in the movie?
Oh, you had me at hello?
You had me at hello. That's definitely one of them. Any other famous lines in that movie? Anyone else who's seen it? Okay, so there's probably 3 famous lines then in the movie, right? There's the you had me at hello, and there's you complete me, and there's show me the money. And usually when I ask this question, for those, especially if it's a bit of an older generation, the men will usually respond right away and say, show me the money, that's the famous line. And the women will usually give me the you had me at hello, or you complete me. When we talk about the Jerry Maguire syndrome, we're referencing specifically that moment of you complete me. Because in the movie, of course, we see, the main character, Tom Cruise, standing in a room, and Renee Zellweger is across the room from him, and he looks over at her, and he says, you complete me. Or she says it, someone says it at some point, right? And we get this idea that that's what love is, that's what the marital relationship is all about. It's about finding completion in someone else. Yet the reality is, if you as an individual do not feel complete, if you as an individual have not found your source of happiness, if you have not found your source of spirituality, then you are not in a position to be seeking that completion, or seeking that happiness, or seeking that source of spirituality from someone else. Because marriage and finding that happily ever after is about having a complementary relationship, not a form of completion. It's about finding the person who complements you, not completes you. And when I say complements, yes, in both senses of the term, complements with an I and complements with an E. That there is this connection with someone, that side by side you are able to dwell in tranquility, but not that without the other person you feel like you are not complete. So seeking that happily ever after, seeking that path, requires a process. It requires first and foremost knowing Allah. Because when we seek the love of another, our goal should be to love another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? A while back, and we had a couple who came to us in our counseling center, and the woman was complaining, and she was saying, he never says, I love you. And so the man turned to her and he said, I always tell you I love you for the sake of Allah. And she was very upset, and she said, yeah, but you don't love me for me. And, we talked it through. And at the end, she kind of understood that when you love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you love that person because you know that your kindness, your smile, your connection with this person helps you further your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this person becomes a means, a path towards getting closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what greater love can there be than a love for a person for the love of Allah? So being able to find that connection with someone, sometimes we sit and we ask ourselves, but how? And oftentimes when I'm speaking on college campuses or at different programs with young people who may still be in that stage of seeking or searching or thinking about marriage, but not yet there, I'll often get the question or the statement of, there's no good ones left. There's no one good left. And the question becomes why? Where are we looking and what are we looking for? When we look at the beautiful story of Khadija radiallahu anha and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we see a love story like no other. A love story that far outweighs, Twilight with, again, I'm kind of dating myself, I haven't seen a movie in a while, but it's a story that's way more beautiful than, a human girl and a vampire falling in love, of course. We see a love that truly captures what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us of the definition of what marital love looks like. And we see that when Khadija radiallahu anha was twice widowed and much older than the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but when she knew what she was looking for in a spouse, when she knew what the characteristics she wanted in a person were, she was very clear because she knew who she was. And because she knew who she was, she knew what she wanted. She knew what she was looking for. She wanted a person of honesty, a person of character, a person of kindness. And so when she would receive word of Al-Amin, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who was nicknamed the most trustworthy, she knew that this was a person that she wanted as a life partner. And so she sent her relative to speak to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And when her relative spoke to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, she spoke with a sense of haya, with a sense of modesty. And she said to the beloved Prophet of Allah, what do you think of marriage? And so the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in his humbleness, said, if the right opportunity presented itself, if the right time came, I would marry. And so the relative of Khadija radiallahu anha responded and said, what do you think of Khadija? And again the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam responded with that humbleness and said, she is far above me in status. And so the relative simply smiled and said, you should consider Khadija for marriage. And in that way the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam knew that if he were to propose to Khadija, she would accept. And so we see that the process of finding that spouse, finding that partner who is supportive, who you can dwell in tranquility with, takes knowing yourself. It takes you understanding who you are, knowing what you're seeking and what you're searching for. And we see the beautiful story of Khadija radiallahu anha and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam unfold. That when the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam first received the revelation, and he was shivering and shaking and was not quite sure how to react, he came from Ghar Hira, and as he headed down, his first thought was to not go to his cousin or his companions to speak of what he saw. His first thought was to go to his beloved Khadija radiallahu anha. And it was in the lap of Khadija radiallahu anha that he shivered and he said, cover me, cover me. And he relayed what he saw. And Khadija radiallahu anha was there with the words of support, telling the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that this was a vision from Allah. And she explained to the Rasul, she said that you are good to your family, you are kind to your neighbors, you care for the orphan, surely your Lord will never forsake you. And she continued with that support, emotional support, financial support, physical support. Why? Because it was a complementary relationship. It was a relationship in where husband and wife had found that place of rest, in which husband and wife found that tranquility within one another. This is how we find our happily ever after. By treading on a path in which we know ourselves, treading on a path in which we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in so knowing Allah, we know what we are seeking in that spouse. But how do we do it? How do we get to know ourselves? You know, one of the biggest difficulties that we see in our counseling centers among husband and wife, or even in the premarital stages when couples are still trying to figure out their level of compatibility, one of the difficulties we see goes back to that verse that we were speaking about in Surah Al-Rum. Not the marriage verse, not verse 21, but verse 22 that follows it. And in that verse, we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that we have a difference in tongues, that our lisan is different. And we see that in the marriage relationship, that difference in tongues can sometimes be what makes or breaks a marriage relationship. How? Some of you may be familiar with a little book known as The 5 Languages of Love by an author, Gary. I'm loving you up there. Like, you are on point tonight, okay? We're understanding each other. So this little book, Gary Chapman wrote this book called The 5 Languages of Love. I highly recommend it. Yes, it's a secular book, but it's a book that helps us understand a little bit more about the process of knowing ourselves and knowing that person that we want to find a happily ever after with. So what are those languages? When we look at the 5 languages of love, we see that there is the language of affirmation, the language of gifting, the language of service, the language of time, and the language of touch. So how does this relate to us on a day-to-day basis, and how does it affect our relationships? Many times we'll have couples who will come in. For example, just recently we had a couple who came in where the man said to the woman, you never say kind words to me. You never compliment me. You never tell me that I work hard. You never say anything nice to me at all. When I put on new pajamas, you don't notice. When I clean shaven or I get a haircut, you never compliment. And so the woman looked at her husband, the wife looked at her husband, and she was like, are you kidding me? I wash all the dishes, I cook all the meals, I vacuum the house from top to bottom. What more do you want from me? And in that scenario, in that interaction, we see that the husband is speaking the language of affirmation. He's seeking out from his spouse words of affirmation. And we see the spouse, the wife, is speaking the language of service. Her love language, her way, the tongue that she is speaking with is by doing. And by her form of doing feels like she is giving. Yet the husband is speaking a different language. We see it often as well, for example, where we'll have like a wife who may say something like, he never spends any time with me. Even when we're sitting together at the dinner table, he's on his phone, he's looking at his laptop. I feel like we have no time together. And then the husband might respond and say something, I just bought you flowers. Like, seriously? No? And again, we see that here the husband is speaking the language of gifting, thinking that he's showing his love with these flowers, and yet the wife is speaking the language of time, seeking out that connection, not just quantity, but quality of time as well. And this happens in our relationships, even outside of the marital relationship, where we may feel hurt by something that a friend does or doesn't do. And yet sometimes the intention behind that action is not to harm you, not to hurt you, but simply because the tongue that is being spoken in is different than the tongue that you're speaking. So getting to know ourselves involves a process of knowing the language that we speak. And that language, again, it's a tongue, not necessarily a lisan, not a lugha. In Arabic, the term lugha is for a language in terms of a dialect, in terms of the words, French, Spanish, English, Arabic. But a lisan is the tongue in which it's delivered. And oftentimes that tongue is very different than the language itself. All right, so other things that we require or need to kind of embody in order to be able to embark on that path of the happily ever after. So we've talked about the language, we've talked about that lisan, but communication goes even deeper than that. And we know, of course, that, we'll often hear it said that communication is the key to a relationship. And I believe even in the little video that you guys put together, someone said that communication, was that you? Good job, all right. Somebody said communication was important in a relationship. And that's absolutely critical, so good answer. But we look around today and we see that we've got iPhones, we've got iPads, we've got iPods, we've got all sorts of ways of communicating. But all these ways of communicating are really ensconced in the I. So we've become a nation, a society, a culture that is very much individualistic, where the focus, even though we have all these external ways of connecting, we've become so internal that we are so occupied with, what was posted on the Snapchat feed, or who posted what on Facebook. I don't know if you guys still use Facebook or not, but or what was up on Twitter, or who put what on Pinterest, that we've become sucked into that I world. Now, a few years back, when I was writing one of my first books, When Muslim Marriage Fails, I was doing some research on the process of divorce and what motivates couples to seek divorce. What was happening in our communities that the divorce rate was increasing at a staggering rate, that we were getting closer and closer to that 50% divorce rate as American Muslims, just as the greater community at large was heading in that direction. And so as I was doing my research, I was seeking out couples who were going through difficulties and considering divorce. And I received an email back from a couple who said, "We heard about your survey. We've been married for 50 years and we want to be part of it." So I was very upset, and I messaged them back and I'm like, "Seriously, you've been married 50 years? What would make you want a divorce now?" And so they responded and said, No, we're perfectly fine. We just want to tell you how to do it right. I was like, okay. So I decided to meet with the couple, and as I said, they were a much older couple, but they were that type of couple that when you see them, your heart just melts. You're just like, aww. So they're like, finishing each other's sentences, holding hands, walking in. And so I sat them down and I'm like, all right, what is it? What is the secret? And I imagined that the response would be, well, we never miss Fajr together, or it's our strong iman, or, we make dua every night. And they didn't say that. The woman answered and she said, the secret to our marriage is Post-its. I'm like, Post-its? Like, seriously? And she was like, let me explain. She said, when we first got married, we used to want to leave notes to each other. And sometimes we'd write them on like a small scrap of paper, or like on like a bag that was lying around. And she said we could never find the notes. They would always drop, we couldn't keep track of the notes. And then she said in the 1980s they invented Post-its. And she said once they invented Post-its, we realized that we could leave each other notes and stick them in places. And I'm like, what kind of notes are you leaving each other for the past 50 years that has kept you together? And so she said that, and then the husband was also responding as they were explaining to me. And the husband first said, since the invention of Post-its, there hasn't been a single day that's passed by that we haven't left each other a note. And the wife said, I'll leave him a note sometimes on his dashboard that says, your eyes are still as beautiful as the first day we met. And then he said he'll leave her a note sometimes on the pillow that says, I'm really angry at you, but I still love you. She said she would leave him a note in his lunch sometimes saying, have a great day. And such simple communications allowed them to keep that connection alive. But today we've got all these ways of communicating, but rarely do we communicate past the functional level and into the emotional level with those we love. So when I ask spouses, especially when couples come in for counseling because they're going through difficulties, the first thing we ask them to do is to pull up the last text exchange that they've had with each other. And 9 times out of 10, the last text exchange goes something like this. You forgot to take out the garbage, ... again. Or don't forget about the kids. So-and-so has soccer practice at this time. This one has, ballet class at this time. This one has Quran class at this time. Don't forget. Okay. Or milk, eggs, bread. And that's it. And we realize that we've become a society that has really devolved into the functional when we communicate with those we love. So I'm going to ask you all to do a little exercise with me. I don't know how many of you are married, okay? I won't put you on the spot. I won't ask, okay? Unless you want to tell me, and then we can see who's looking, and we can, turn this into a matrimonial dinner, or not, okay? Just a suggestion, okay? All right. If you are married, Send a message to your spouse right now on one of your devices. Okay? Something emotional, reminding your spouse why you love them for the sake of Allah. If you are not married, as I see most people not pulling out their devices, so that tells me something. If you are not married, reach out to someone you love. Reach out to a parent. Reach out to a sibling. Reach out to a close friend even. Tell them that you love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remind them why. You cannot send the message to the person next to you, okay? It has to be to someone else, okay? Like your buddy sitting right next to you does not need a message right now, okay? So send that message. Why? You know, the last time I did this exercise in a seminar where I was speaking to the men separately and then I was speaking to the women separately, I asked the men to send this message to their wives, and this was a marriage seminar where everyone that attended was married. And like 30 seconds later, after everyone had pulled out their texts and sent a nice message to their spouse, all the phones started ringing. And all the husbands were picking up their phones and saying, "No, I swear I didn't do anything. I promise, I didn't do anything wrong." And it was really an indication that it has become a lost art. The form of communication in order to convey emotion, the form of communication in order to share a word of kindness, in order to exhibit mawadda wa rahmah. And if we cannot exhibit mawadda wa rahmah, care and mercy towards those we love even prior to marriage, it becomes very, very difficult to exhibit it even after marriage. And of course, prior to marriage, I'm talking about halal relationships, okay? Don't be texting someone if there is no halal relationship there, okay? So make sure whoever you are texting, it is okay, okay? Right. So learning how to communicate in a way that connects us with someone else. Again, it is becoming a lost art. It's becoming something that's difficult for us because we've lost that sense of being able to connect outside of the technology. Step away from that for a little bit. Recognize how that connection can occur and how it should occur. You know, one of the languages that we spoke about and we didn't really delve too deep into is the language of touch. And oftentimes when we think of the language of touch, especially in the marital terms, we think immediately of intimacy because that's something that our society has kind of driven into our minds as the consummation of any relationship of love must end in this way. But when we look at the language of touch and understand it from the Islamic viewpoint even, we look at the relationship of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his interaction with the mothers of the believers, his beloved wives. And we see, for example, in his relationship with Aisha radiallahu anha, there is a beautiful narration that Aisha radiallahu anha explained to the Sahaba to describe what that language of touch was like, even in the relationship between her and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And she described a situation where there was a weapons demonstration that was occurring in the masjid. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her if she would like to watch. And in telling us the narration, she said she responded yes. And so the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood in front of Aisha radiallahu anha as she stood behind him. And because she was a little bit shorter than him, she said she lifted up her toes, she stood up on her toes a little bit, rested her chin on the shoulder of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, her cheek upon his cheek, and wrapped her arms around his waist. And she said, we stood there for some time. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her, have you seen enough? And she responded, no. And she said, we stood there for some time longer. And she asked, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked again, have you seen enough? And again she said, no. And then a third time, and she said, yes. And in giving us this narration, she explained that she had no super desire to stand there watching for so long. But she described the patience of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in wanting to ensure that she had had her fill, that she was comfortable, that she had seen what she had wanted to see. And she described that connection that she had in standing so close to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with her arms around his waist, with her chin upon his shoulder and her cheek upon his cheek. That's powerful, because that's how we see the connection between husband and wife. That's the type of connection that is mawadda wa rahma epitomized, because we see that care, we see that mercy, the mercy and the patience, the care and the solicitation and asking if she had seen enough. And so today, again, we sometimes look to what society feeds us. We look at, the Bollywood movies where Shah Rukh Khan and, the lead lady are dancing in a field of poppies and everyone stops and dances with them. And, or we're watching, the Arabic movies with Fatin Hamama and Umar al-Sharif, and they're looking from a distance at each other. And we think, this is love. But that's love with the color red. That's passion. That's elevated emotion that is not long-lasting. But love with the color blue is that love of tranquility. It's that love that's rooted in a love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's our end goal. That's what we're striving for in trying to reach that happily ever after. And when we talk about knowing ourselves, when we talk about knowing our language of love, knowing what we seek, knowing what we're looking for, of course we're not talking about something static. We change over time. And our likes and our dislikes may change. But the better we know ourselves in the stage that we're in, the better we can connect with someone else and know what we're looking for and how we can continue on that path of seeking, and seeking in the way that is, of course, halal, and coming from that place of hayat, that place of modesty in interaction, modesty in connecting. So when we think of that path that we're treading on, it's a process. But at the same time, we don't want to say, oh, I want to get married and I'm going to make dua and maybe Allah will send me, my prince on the white horse, or my princess, who's stuck in the tower will come down. That's not what we are advised to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that in all of our actions we should have tawakkul. Tawakkul is different than tawakkul. Tawakkul is knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners. Knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has our back. But it's also about doing our part. Tawakkul is sitting at home, ripping open a bag of Doritos, halal Doritos, of course, not the cheesy enzyme ones. Okay? You're eating your bag of Doritos and you're thinking, you know what? I want to get married, but I have tawakkul. I'll just hang out here and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send me my spouse. That's not how it happens, right? And we see that concept of tawakkul exhibited for us in the hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when a man went to the marketplace to trade his items and he left his camel aside. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked the man, aren't you going to tie your camel? And the man responded and said, tawakkaltu ala Allah. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam responded and said, tie your camel wa tawakkul ala Allah. So that tawakkul has to be tied to action. So when you are in the process of finding the levels of maturity, now when we talk about bulugh, often we talk about bulugh in the physical sense of maturity, the sense of reaching puberty. But there are several levels of maturity that we must reach before we seek out that path of marriage. And part of it is emotional maturity, financial maturity within the right means, of course, physical maturity, and several other stages of bulugh that we must attain. When we've attained those levels of bulugh and we are in that place now where we are ready to seek a spouse, this is the point where we have to practice tawakkul, meaning we do our part. And doing our part means maintaining hayat while also seeking on that path. So letting the chaplain, I don't know if you guys have a chaplain at the university here, but if you don't have a chaplain, letting an imam know, letting your relatives know, letting those who may know people in the community know what you're looking for, who you are, what you're seeking in a spouse. And when people know what you're looking for, if you are presented with a person who meets those characteristics, think of Khadija radiallahu anha. and think of how we have unnecessarily complicated the process of marriage and made it more difficult than it has to be. If there is no imam, if there is no rishta auntie in the community, if there is no chaplain, tell me, okay? Let me know that you're seeking. Let me know that you're looking for someone. Because in order for us to be a strong ummah, in order for us to be able to develop that foundation that inshallah will lead us all to a happily ever after, we have to look out for one another. And we have to build that foundation on something strong, which is a sincere love of others for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that said, I know we want to leave some time for question and answer. So I'm going to wrap up here, and inshallah we can open it for question and answer. Jazakumullahu khair.
Okay, so if you haven't already sent in the questions, we're going to start the Q&A session, inshallah ta'ala. So, you guys have a few more minutes to send them in, so do that.
So this question says, how does one know if they are loved by others for the sake of Allah? That's a beautiful question. All right, so let's talk a little bit more in terms of what it means to love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you look at a marital relationship, since that's what we've been discussing so far, if you love someone for their own sake, then what you are going to love about that person is how they make you feel. What you're going to love about that person is what you get out of the relationship. When you love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you shift from that individualistic focus that we talked about, and it is no longer about what you get from that person, and it is more about what you give, and how you giving to that person brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that giving should be mutual, of course. That giving should not be one-sided. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam reminded us in a hadith, an authentic narration, that the best of you is the best to his family, and I am the best to mine. What does that mean, to be the best to your family, and how does that relate to loving someone for the sake of Allah? I'll give you an example. A while back, my husband and I were walking together in the mall, and my husband saw a brother from the community, and he saw him from a distance, and he started to approach him. And he saw that the brother was very agitated, and he was yelling in Arabic at his children and his wife, and he's like, finish up, you're taking forever, khalas, this is driving me crazy, let's just stop shopping. Okay? And as we came a little closer, there was somebody approaching from the other side, and it was one of the brother's co-workers from work. And so the co-worker arrived before we did, and she's like, hey Mo, how's it going? And so Mo, and the brother knows that I share this story in my lectures, and he's okay with it. So the woman, the co-worker, approaches him, and he turns to her and he was like, oh, hi Joni, it's so nice to see you. Look at my beautiful wife and my beautiful children, and big smile on his face. And then Joni walks off, hello, she walks off. And we were getting a little closer, and he turns to his wife and children again. Getkum al-araf, khallasuni, finish, I'm so tired of this, enough already. And so, my husband, being a good friend of his, he kind of pointed it out to him when he got there, and it was like a moment of realization for all of us, that realistically speaking, we often save the best of us, our best smile, our best voice, our kindest words, to those who are not our family. And in those moments, we are not loving our family members for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are instead loving them only because we feel like we have that connection from them in what they give to us. So in loving someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you step away from the desire to satisfy your nafs, and instead, you step closer to a desire to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by pleasing the person. So when we are reminded that the smile is sadaqah, knowing that that smile to our loved ones, it goes even further than just the smile to the gharib, to a stranger, that's when you love someone for the sake of Allah. And when you love someone for the sake of Allah, it becomes, when you wake up in the morning, your spouse is not always going to look at age 45 the way he or she looked at age 25, right? There are going to be mornings where, your spouse wakes up with morning breath. There's going to be mornings where your spouse's hair is a mess. There's going to be days where, if you are anchoring your love in the person rather than in that love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those things will bother you. And the love for the person may decrease. But when you anchor your love for in the marital relationship to the love or loving someone for the sake of Allah, then you are able to see past that and see how this person and your mu'amala, your interaction and your kindness with this person can draw you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Is it wrong to love someone for themselves in addition to or for the sake of Allah? So we kind of expanded on that a little bit in the previous question, but it is absolutely natural. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us to be attracted to the opposite gender. And in the marital relationship, part of the blessing in that marriage is that we gain that enjoyment of being with the one that we are attracted to, physically, emotionally, enjoying their company. That is absolutely a part of the marital relationship. But what happens when you're annoyed at the spouse? What happens when you get ticked off at them? What happens when years later, the spouse has put on a few pounds? What happens when, the spouse has, less hair or more hair, depending on who you are? What happens when those changes occur? If you are only loving the person for who they are and what you get out of the relationship, then that love will go. But if you are loving the person for the sake of Allah and enjoying the blessing and the benefit that you receive from being with that person, then that's the long-lasting love. All right. What would you say to someone who's being pressured in the community to get married because of age? All right, so this is a common one, I'll never forget when I was, I think I was about 21 years old. So, no, I did get married at 21, so I was probably about 20 at the time. I was at a friend of mine's wedding, and an auntie came up to me, and she said to me, a girl is like a flower. She reaches a certain age when she blossoms. I am guessing you've heard this. She blossoms, and then if she's not plucked, she withers and dies. I was very affected by this. Let me just tell you that is not true. That there is no weight in terms of being a flower and withering and dying. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ahzab reminds us that men or women, whoever we are judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the merit of our deeds, not on our age, not on, what we look like, not on our gender, but it is in the merit of our deeds. So when we talk about marriage, we should never put like an expiration date and say, if I don't get married by this point, then I'm never going to get married. And our community shouldn't either. That doesn't mean that they don't. They shouldn't, but it doesn't mean that they don't. Realistically speaking, as long as you are truly living that concept that we talked about, tawakkul, of doing your part, as long as you are in a place where for example, you have reached those levels of bulugh, of maturity that we talked about, and each person reaches those levels of maturity at a different age. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone. But if you have reached those levels and you know that you are in the position and a place to be married, then follow that path of sa'i, striving. What does sa'i mean, and what does it mean to actually strive? We look at the example of Hajar radiallahu anha, and we see that Hajar, the mother of Ismail, when Ibrahim alayhi salam was commanded to take Hajar and Ismail into the desert, Hajar radiallahu anha walked behind Ismail and asked, "Why are you taking us to the desert?" And the first time he didn't respond. And again she asked, "Why are you taking us to the desert?" Again he didn't respond. The third time she said, "Is this a commandment from your Lord?" And Ibrahim alayhi salam responded in the affirmative and said, "Yes." And so Hajar radiallahu anha responded and said, "Then surely our Lord will provide for us." So this is the first step of tawakkul, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners and the best of all providers. But when they entered into the desert and Ismail alayhi salam began to cry, the heart of the mother of course hurt, it ached because she knew her child was crying from thirst. But she didn't just sit down next to Ismail alayhi salam and make dua and say, I know Allah will provide for us. She committed what we replicate today when we go to Umrah or Hajj, which is sa'i, striving 7 times, running back and forth between Safa and Marwa, taking action, having tawakkul, knowing full well that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners and providers, but also doing her part. Taking that action from 7 times. If you are at that stage in your life where you feel that you are ready for marriage and you feel that you have reached those levels of maturity, have that sense of tawakkul. Commit to sa'i. Do your part, but know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners. And if it doesn't happen at age 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, I promise you, you will not wither and die. It doesn't happen, okay? You will be okay. And know that it will, inshallah, happen when the time is right and when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees. Alright, how do you marry someone without dating and understanding who they are? Dating helps you truly know someone without being awkward by the presence of parents. Okay, great question. So what's really interesting is that a few years ago, there was a study that was done, and it was done by a communication organization, and it studied the entire American society, non-Muslims, Muslims, people of the Jewish faith, Hindu faith, whatever it was. And in this study, the researchers found that couples who had dated or lived with each other for 2 or more years prior to marriage had a much higher chance of divorce, a much higher rate of divorce than couples who did not date or did not live with each other. What does that tell you? That means that even if you have dated, even if you have lived with someone, this does not increase your chances of a successful marriage. We put so much emphasis on having to know the other person and not enough emphasis on knowing ourselves. So we focus quite frequently on, well, I need to know him, I need to know her. But the reality is that what we may see externally may not always be what we see behind closed doors. So the way to improve the chances of success in our relationship is to know Allah, to know ourselves, to know what we want and what we're looking for, to understand who we are, what will we compromise and what will we never compromise, and to go through premarital counseling, okay? And I say this because the importance of having that third party sometimes can mean all the difference, because sometimes we rely too heavily on ourselves. And there's a beautiful dua that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not leave us to ourselves even for the blink of an eye. وَلَا تَكِلْنِي إِلَى نَفْسِي وَلَا طَرْفَةَ عَيْنٍ. So don't leave me to myself even for the blink of an eye. Why? Because sometimes when we rely too heavily on ourselves, we tend to not know the path that we're going on because we are blinded by emotion, or there's a ghashawa, a covering in our eyes where we can't see what it is that we're meant to see. So if you want to know whether or not someone is who you're seeking for marriage or has the characteristics you're looking for, ask, who is this person friends with? Who does this person hang out with? Who do they surround themselves with? Because we know that, of course, there's a beautiful hadith about friendship, that a friend can either be like a perfume maker or like a blacksmith. That if you affiliate with a blacksmith, even if you don't work with the metals and then the irons, some of the soot and the bellows of the blacksmith will cling to you. And if you are close with a perfume maker, even if you don't make the perfume, some of the scent of the perfume will cling to you. So you know a person by looking at their friends, the company they keep, by asking about that person, by finding out someone who is reliable, who has known this person. And even then, in Egypt we have a saying that marriage is like a watermelon. If you've ever gone shopping for a watermelon with your mom, and they lift up the watermelon, they're like knocking on it, and you're like, what are they listening for? Like, I still haven't figured it out. I just pretend to do it because it looks like the right thing to do when I'm in supermarkets. But, realistically speaking, that's what marriage is like sometimes. You may not know what's inside of it. But that's where knowing yourself, knowing Allah, and seeking the characteristics in a person that we are advised and guided to look for, knowing that if you marry someone who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who knows his or her deen, then you will marry someone who will at least treat you بِمَا يَرْضِي اللَّهِ, which means they will treat you in a way where they want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their mu'amalah of you. So the follow-up, is dating halal? I'm not sure where that came from, my response, but okay. When we talk about the process of marriage from an Islamic point of view, I usually like to describe it, especially to younger people. Have you ever seen that show, Little House on the Prairie? Yeah, okay, good. That was like the only show we were allowed to watch on television when I was growing up. So Little House on the Prairie has it's kind of like life in the 1800s in the US. And in the show, when the young woman, Laura Ingalls Wilder, wants to get married, and there's someone who has shown interest in her, what happens? They don't date, they court. What is courting? Courting is when the person interested enters the home of the family of the person who they are interested in, and they meet with the family members, they meet with the person, with the family there, with relatives. Courting is also a lost art, but courting is what we as Muslims need to return to better understand the process of marriage itself. Because when we marry, it is not just two individuals coming together. We are marrying two individuals, two families, two communities, two backgrounds, two worldviews, two cultures. There's more at stake than just two people. And if it is just two people thinking, well, it's just us against the world, unfortunately, we often see that is not a marriage that will last. Because just as we say it takes a village to raise a child, it takes an ummah to maintain a strong marriage. Because it's not just about you. And if we get sucked into this individualistic viewpoint, that it's all about me, all about feeding my desires, all about what makes me feel good, then we've lost the meaning of marriage. Because marriage is all about that journey. It's all about that path of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by loving someone for the sake of Allah. And you don't get there by dating. You get there by following the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and understanding how that process unfolds. Okay. All right, what are your suggestions to getting parents to be accepting to cross-cultural marriages? Their excuses, language barriers, having negative stereotypes of a culture in the marriage process. All right, so a while back, I had written an article actually about this very topic, and in it there is like 10 steps of how to get your parents to understand those verses in Surah Al-Rum and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of our diversity, reminds us of how we've been created from different areas of the earth so we may know one another. And yes, oftentimes there is that fear of language barriers, that fear of cultural things, of food that's different. But I'll tell you, it's not always just from different countries. I remember when I first met my husband, so we met when we were in Rutgers in college. We were in the same Arabic class together. And as the time progressed, and for me, at that time, I didn't know myself well enough. So my husband, mashallah, we've been married for over 20 years now. But he's kind of always known himself. And I remember first day, freshman year Arabic class, he came up to me and he said, "I'm going to marry you." And I'm like, what? Like, yeah, I don't think so. And, for 4 years, I kept saying, I don't think so. But subhanAllah, when I finally did get to know myself, I did realize, like, oh, okay, he's still here. He is the one I'm going to marry. But long story short, My husband is from Alexandria, which is like a seafaring town. He was born here and raised here as I was, but his family comes from Alexandria. My family comes from Cairo, which is, a few miles away from where Alexandria is in Egypt. And I remember when he first came to speak to my parents, my mother was devastated because she was like, I can't, this is an intercultural marriage. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that his family comes from Egypt, you guys come from Egypt. And to this day, my mom will still say things like, oh, your husband does that because he's from Alexandria. That's what Alexandrian people do, So when we talk about, barriers or cross-cultural marriages, sometimes it doesn't even have to be from a different country or from a different language. Sometimes our parents may have this fear of that which seems different, only because they haven't known it, only because they don't understand it. So my advice, if you are struggling, and I think this is a bit of a personal question because it continues describing that there's someone who comes from a different ethnicity and the parents have like negative stereotypes about that person. I always think in these types of situations, involve a third party. Bring in an imam, bring in a trusted uncle or an auntie, bring in someone who knows your parents and who they trust, who can speak to them. And a lot of times your parents will dismiss what you have to say because they'll think, oh, you're just being emotional. You don't know what's best for you. We know how that culture is. We know how that person from that background is. And a lot of times it's coming out of a sincere place of worry for you, not a place of wanting to harm you or to hurt you or to make you feel bad, but it's just a not knowing. And so the first step is gaining that knowledge or allowing your parents to gain that knowledge, to understand the culture better. Bring in a third party. Bring in someone who can speak to them, someone who can explain to them. We've done it many times, at our counseling centers. We've had many young couples who come to us and who go through our compatibility counseling, and we feel like, okay, you're a great fit, even if background, ethnicity, language may be different. And then the parents are like, absolutely not. And so we've spoken to them, and alhamdulillah, there have been many successful cases where it takes some time, but eventually the parents do come around and start to see the positive characteristics of this individual rather than the culture or the differences that they worry about. So give it time. I would never say jump the gun and go against your parents and marry behind their back. Of course not. Because there is something incredibly important and beautiful, of course, about the blessings of parents. Yet there are also times where parents may not understand, and without understanding, do something which is, again, Islamically incorrect, which is refuse a person because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of their culture. Don't give up, but find a way to reach your parents. Give me a call, I'll talk to them, okay? And inshallah, you'll find those avenues. Make that sincere dua and recognize that even if it seems really difficult at the time, that if there is nasib, then inshallah that will happen. All right. Was someone specific written for us or made for us? How do you know? Can you discuss istikhara as well? Okay, so let's start with the process of istikhara. So when we pray istikhara, oftentimes we think we're going to have a dream, or we're going to see something, or we're going to be walking down Broadway and a billboard is going to have the answer to what we're seeking istikhara. Sometimes it may happen that way, but not always. So with istikhara, the idea behind istikhara is that if your mind is already made up, or if you're leaning towards something, it is likely that even if you pray istikhara, subconsciously you're going to start seeing signs that confirm for you your thought process. So true istikhara is meant to be prayed when you really don't know which direction to go in. But as human beings, we usually tend to lean one way or the other towards a specific choice. So when you pray istikhara anyway, I wouldn't say don't pray just because you're leaning towards one side or the other, but pray istikhara knowing that you are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance. And whatever path may open up for you, whatever path you decide to go in, you've started that path by seeking the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, sometimes we really may not know, sometimes we really may be at a loss, and maybe the istikhara will give us some kind of a sign. But don't put everything into that, well, I saw the billboard on Broadway that said, Adam, and that means I'm going to marry a guy named Adam. no. Alright, you want to be careful of reading too much into something like that. But if you pray istikhara and in your heart you feel serenity or tranquility that we talked about before towards a specific path, then inshallah know that that serenity and tranquility bi'idhnillah is something that is giving you comfort. And if you pray istikhara and you are still feeling unsettled, yes, partially it may be your subconscious, it may be your fears, but also trust in the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, keep going back to that tawakkul and that sa'i, that striving. Ask, seek out the knowledge, find out from others, what's going on. Speak to your parents, speak to your friends, because you never know where the answer to your dua may be. It may be in a person who speaks to you and comes up with a different direction. It may be in talking to someone else, talking to someone who's wise or who knows whatever it is that you're questioning. And that may be your answer. So in terms of was someone specific written for us or made for us? So we often talk about nasib, right? And many people will sometimes ask, well, if my nasib is one person, and the word nasib essentially means the one that is written for you. If my nasib is one person, what if I divorce that person and I marry someone else? What if I become widowed? What if, my nasib is someone but I marry someone else? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, of course, with a certain limited understanding. And part of our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is of course built on that iman, that faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all providers. So when we talk about qada and qadar, we know that there are certain things that are written for us. Whether or not the specific person that we are going to marry is written for us, the scholars differ on this point. There are some opinions that even if we're married more than once, it is something that is written. And there are some opinions that our path is written for us, but not necessarily the person. I think this is the part where, again, we know that there is the concept of nasib, but we also do our part. Take those steps of tawakkul, of sa'i, knowing that, again, the example is kind of like when we look at the example of Maryam alayhi salam. Maryam alayhi salam had that full qana'ah, that full conviction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, kun fayakun, be and it would be. But when she was in the throes of labor, in the pain of childbirth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded her to shake the trunk of the palm tree so that the fruit would fall. Now we know if you try to shake the trunk of the palm tree and you're not in labor even, fruit doesn't really fall, right? It doesn't really shake. It's very difficult to move it. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was commanding Maryam alayhi salam to do what? To strive, to take action, to do her part. So in the process of marriage, don't sit back and just say, well, it's my nasib, it's written for me, it's meant to be. No, do your part. Take that action, knowing full well that Allah will say, kun fayakun, be and it will be. Is it okay to reject someone because they don't have the same expectations or values of you? Okay, so sharing expectations and values is it's a very, very important part of marriage, especially if those values are related to the deen, are related to the core of belief. Okay. Now I'll give you an example. Many times we have couples who come in and will say, when we got married, we were both kind of like here in terms of deen, in terms of religion and practicing. And now I've become much more religious and, I've gone to Hajj and I've had this awakening and I'm here and she's here. What should I do? I want to bring her up to here. And a lot of times we see this in the marriage relationship where you may have begun is not necessarily where the journey continues. And there are these changes that happen throughout the journey. Does it mean that you step away if throughout the process of marriage these changes have occurred? No, of course not. It means that you recognize your path and you hold on to that path and you exhibit the positive characteristics of that path, knowing that you're on the journey together and the characteristics of the path, the positive characteristics, will inshallah be emulated by your partner if your partner truly has that love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their connection with you. So is it okay to reject someone because they don't have the same expectations and values? I think that's one of the core reasons why you would want to know whether or not there's compatibility. And when we do our compatibility counseling, it's one of the areas we definitely address sharing values, sharing expectations, because that is very important. How does one get to know themselves? If it's an ongoing process, when do we know we're ready to take a step forward to getting married? All right, how do you know yourself? We talked a little bit about knowing the love language that you speak, but it's also about knowing your habits, knowing, again, what would you compromise on, what would you never compromise on? You are absolutely right that it's a process, that you grow, and through that process of growth, you will change. But at your core, who you are, the being, like your essence of who you are, that stays. And that may be a constant place of improvement, a place that you want to improve in. But know, what's your trajectory? Where and how do you want to improve? What areas of your life are, again, prioritized? And how do you want to get there? That's how you get to know yourself. Also, there's a lot of great personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs test. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Now, that's a trait-based test, a state-based test, not a trait-based test. So when you open, like, I don't know if you guys read, like, the Cosmopolitan magazine or, like those trashy magazines you see in the supermarket sometimes. When you open those quizzes are usually state-based, not trait-based. Myers-Briggs is a bit more of a more intensive psychological type test, and that can give you some insight into, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Are you judging, are you perceiving? Are you intuitive or are you thinking? And it gives you a little bit more insight into who you are. Now, I don't put 100% stock into these tests, of course. It's one piece of the puzzle. It's one piece of getting to know who you are. Also, look at your friends. Again, a believer is like a mirror unto a believer, and our friends can often reflect who we are. Look at your friends. Who your friends are has a huge influence on who you are. Ask yourself, who do you hang out with? Who do you affiliate with? What do you see in the people that surround you, and how does that help define you? That's another way of getting to know yourself. And how do you know if you're ready to take the step forward to getting married? A big part of that process, again, we said there's those elements of bulugh. And once you reach those elements of bulugh, once you reach those stages of maturity, again, it happens at different times for different people. But essentially, you'll know. And if you're not sure, talk to your family members, talk to those closest to you. But within yourself, you will know if you've reached that stage where age, physical maturity, emotional maturity, financial maturity is there, and then you're able to take that step, inshallah. All right, what's the best way for a brother to approach a girl in a halal manner? Okay. Great question. Or for a sister to approach a brother in a halal manner, okay? Because as we said, that's part of our Islamic history as well. All right, so what do? You're sitting in calculus class, and you look across the aisle. I don't know, did that touch a nerve? Does anyone sit in calculus class and find their future spouse, maybe? So you're sitting in calculus class, and as you're sitting there, you look over and you see this. I'm going to say it from the brother's perspective, right? So as a brother, you're sitting there and you see Amina walk in. And Amina walks in, and she's looking down. She's looking all proper, and she sits down. She's talking to her classmate. She has a nice smile, and Amina drops her pencil. And your heart starts fluttering, and you're like, oh my God, I can pick up her pencil and I can start talking to her. Okay, so yes, pick up her pencil. Okay, you can pick up Amina's pencil, but remember and remind yourself of the importance of haya. Okay, haya, modesty. Knowing how to approach someone with that modesty. Now, far too often, I'll attend events like this, like an MSA event, and I see all of the sisters on one side of the room, all of the brothers on the other side. And I'm not saying let's intermingle and everyone sit next to each other. No, of course, we want to maintain haya. But sometimes it can be very kind of disappointing that we leave the MSA event hall, or we leave the classroom that the event is being held in, and Jennifer starts walking towards us, and Jennifer's like, hey, Billy and Mo and Bob and whatever other nicknames, and Billy and Mo and Bob are like, hey Jen, what's up, how was that calc test, right? And Jen's like, oh, the calc test was great, I passed it, I can give you my notes and whatnot. And then Amina walks by. And Amina's like, Assalamu alaikum. And Muhammad looks down, and there's like no eye contact. And like, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. It's like, come on, guys. Haya goes across the board. The same haya that you're going to practice in front of Muhammad and Amina is the same haya that you maintain in front of Jennifer and Jill and Mike and Mom and whoever else. Okay? So when you are approaching a sister because you are interested in marriage, again, the entire premise must begin from the element of haya. So you see that person in calculus class, you start to notice that, she comes in on time, she's very respectful and polite to the professor. You happen to see her at an MSA meeting, and there's characteristics that you feel like, okay, this might be a connection. Again, the same way that you would feel comfortable going up to someone saying, Assalamu alaikum, how are you? How was your day? You can maintain that haya in that modest interaction. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so many guidelines in terms of how to maintain that modesty, and how we dress, and how we talk, and how we walk, and how we interact. It's meant to be maintained because we are going to interact. And we maintain that modesty in our interaction even when we're going down that path of seeking a marital relationship. Again, we go back to the example of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we see that there was an intermediary, that there was someone, a relative, someone close that was trusted. We know that Khawla was one of the, radiallahu anha, was one of the individuals at the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam who would also help in that process and say, I know this person from that family and this person from that family, and they may be a good connection. So find that trusted individual. And in the meantime, don't stare at the back of Amina's head in calculus class, okay? Like, remember that haya in gaze, as well as haya in language, haya in interaction. Find that third person, find that intermediary, a chaplain, an imam, a relative, someone who is in the community who can be in that position to speak to the person that you may be interested in. And do your due diligence. Ask about the person you're interested in. Find out who that person's friends are, and then follow the path in that way. And then start the process of courting. Let's say, again, the first defense, I guess, or the first attraction will come from that site, right? You want to marry someone who you wouldn't mind waking up to every morning, right? There's a hadith on Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam where a man came to him and said, I want to marry so-and-so, the daughter of so-and-so. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him, did you see her? And so the man said, no, I hear she's a great person and she's from this family and that. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you should see her. Which means that qubul is part of the kafa'a. Qubul is knowing that there is some kind of an attraction to someone, and that kafa'a is compatibility. So part of the kafa'a is qubul. So follow the process in a way where you're maintaining haya, where you can speak to someone with that same type of modesty that you would utilize in any type of interaction. And if upon speaking to that person with that sense of modesty, you feel that it is time to take the next step, then ask. And then start the courting process with family involved. All right, there's a lot of questions. How are we doing on time? We're good? We can keep going? Or do we need to wrap up soon? Keep going? Okay, I don't know how hungry you guys are, so I know at some point we're going to stop talking about marriage and start talking about food. All right, what kind of questions or methodology do you use to assess compatibility between potential spouses in your counseling experiences? So I can't really give away the secrets of the trade, but we do have a set premarital counseling program and a marriage facilitation program. So again, I won't put anyone on the spot, but if you are at that stage that we're talking about where you've met those levels of maturity and you are now at the stage of seeking, through Cornerstone, we do have a site on our website, a section on our website called Cornerstone Connections. And through our Cornerstone Connections, it's an absolutely free service where we simply ask you to fill out a form. If you're comfortable putting a picture in, we'll ask you to do that as well. If not, that's totally fine. We do hold events. We try to hold them every few months, and we're actually expanding the program a bit, so we'll be holding them more frequently. And what we do is our counselors on a weekly basis look through the database of the files that are coming in through the connection site, and we have people coming in from Boston, from Connecticut, from California, from all over the place, and we try to see if there are connections that can be made based on what you're interested in and what a spouse is seeking, or a potential spouse is seeking. Then we proceed to do an email introduction. And through the email introduction, we'll tell you, hey, we have a person who we think might be a good match for you. If you're interested, we can introduce you. We ask in the beginning, at least, that you have the counselor CC'd, so that there is that formal process, kind of. And then we ask that the next step would be that you set up a counseling session for compatibility counseling. And through the compatibility counseling, we look at several different areas. We apply something called Hofstede's value dimensions, which is 5 value dimensions that assess whether or not you're compatible from a value standpoint. We also incorporate theories of Edward Hall, which is, again, we kind of integrate the psychological and communication theories with the Islamic perspective as well. We assess, of course, the level of compatibility in terms of worldview, in terms of what your views on faith and spirituality and religion in practice are, as well as in theory, and so on and so forth. So it's a 6-session compatibility assessment, essentially. Once we give you the green light, I'm kidding, people don't usually wait for us to give the green light. Sometimes we'll be like, no, run, you guys are not compatible, and they still get married. So, I mean, it really, of course, it depends on how you're feeling, of course, in the end. But once we do guide you through the process, we encourage you to keep kind of touching base with us as you go through the process of marriage. So if you're interested, you can definitely check out our website and look at the connections link that's on the website. Okay, I'm gonna kind of fast forward a little bit in some of these questions. We see, okay. For premarital counseling, should this be done when the couple has already agreed to get married or when they're still in talks? So as I said, we have a compatibility counseling, which is when the couple is still in talks, and then we have the premarital counseling, which usually occurs once a wedding date is set or once, the couple has decided to get married. So, I mean, you're kind of asking someone who's biased. As a counselor, I'd be like, always, before marriage, after marriage, in between marriage, all the time. I truly believe in the power of seeking out a third person's knowledge or a third person's assessment. And this is, again, part of our deen even is seeking shura, of asking, not just relying on yourself, as we said before, but trying to seek out the advice and the knowledge that surrounds you. Is it okay to seek marriage when you're not sure about what career path you want for yourself? I sometimes feel like it interferes with my flexibility, but I feel like I'm ready for my search for a spouse. Okay. So again, one of the false dichotomies that society has set up for us is that it's either or. Either, and particularly as women, so I'm going to kind of put this towards the women, but I think it's important for the men to hear as well. We've been led to believe either you get your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD, your MD, your second PhD, or you get married and have children. Either you're successful in the work world or you're successful in the home. And really, we understand, again, even from the Islamic concept, that it's not an either or, that our marriages are a partnership. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in the last khutbah, in his last sermon to the ummah, he reminded the ummah that of the rights of the men and the women in marriage. And he reminds men and women, and particularly he speaks to the men, and he says, they are your partners and committed helpers, in describing that relationship between men and women. And so we see, what does it mean to be partners? What does it mean to have that partnership? When Aisha radiallahu anha was asked to describe what the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did in his time, she said, when he was not in worship, when he was not in ibadah, he was in service to his family. What did it mean to be in service to his family? Whether it was, darning or helping in the household or helping in assisting with the whatever was going on at home. We've lost that sense today, and we kind of have been led to believe it's either or. If you are not sure about your career path yet, that does not mean you are not ready for marriage, okay? It simply means that as you marry, you may be able to find that path, and it's not either or. May there be